At first glance, both of these lights might seem pretty much the same, but there are definitely some key differences between the two that you're going to want to hear about before you decide which one is best for you. In one corner, we've got the Amaran 200X, Amaran being the more budget-friendly line from Aputure, and the 200X being the 200-watt bicolor Bowens mount option in the lineup. And in the other corner, we've got the 220B from Smallrig, who you probably know from making camera cages and similar accessories, but who seem to be making pretty much everything these days. So in this video, we're going to compare these two lights, talk about how they're similar, how they're different, my personal experience with them, and which one I would recommend for you. Secure the cup, let's get into it. Kicking things off with some basic info. These are both COB lights with approximately 200 watts of power and a standard Bowens mount for modifiers. Both lights are bicolor, which means that you can change the color from warm to cool, but no RGB color capabilities. Both companies offer versions of these lights at approximately the 100 watt range, as well as slightly cheaper daylight color versions where you can't adjust the color at all. The reasons that I chose the ones that I did for this review is because I believe they're the best value options with the most versatility and still bright enough to be good for most purposes. There are a few more reasons that I'll talk about later. Now, let's get straight into brass tacks. The Amaran 200X is $349 US, whereas the Smallrig is $369. So technically the Amaran wins the budget category by $20. The Smallrig comes with a nice protective carrying case with spots for everything inside: the power supply, basic reflector, and the light itself. The Amaran comes with no fancy protective case, though you could keep the cardboard box that has a handle and use that. Comes with the power supply, a reflector, and the light. Both Amaran and Smallrig have options so that you can power these with batteries as well, but those are add-ons that you have to purchase. As far as size and weight, the Smallrig is both larger and heavier, and even though it's not by a whole lot, the size does make a reasonable difference if you're trying to fit it into a particular spot in a small room. As far as build quality, both of these are made of mostly plastic, and I wouldn't want to put them through too much stress, but if they're mostly going to be stationary on stands, they'll do just fine. That being said, it does seem like both of them have some metal parts or reinforcements where they might be needed, which is nice. As far as physical features, they're both very similar, with a single lever to loosen and adjust the angle of the light. They both also have a spot on the mount for an umbrella reflector if you'd like to use one of those. One advantage that I would give to the Smallrig in this category is the Bowens mount release. The button to release the mount feels better and it's easier to operate, and the Bowens mount itself feels a bit more sturdy on the Smallrig. The controls on both lights consist of one on and off switch and two knobs. Personally, I prefer the control setup on the Amaran. On the Amaran, one knob is brightness and the other knob is color temperature. So it's really simple to use, and even if you can't see the screen on the back, you can figure out how to adjust what you need. The brightness goes from 1% to 100%, and the color temperature goes from 2700 Kelvin to 6500 Kelvin. You can also press each of the knobs in to cycle through different preset levels of brightness: 20%, 40%, 60, 80, and 100, and color temperatures of 2700, 3200, 4300, 5600, and 6500. This is super convenient and makes it nice and easy to adjust quickly. On the Smallrig, one knob controls both the brightness and color temperature. It also ranges from 1% to 100 and 2700 to 6500 Kelvin. You can switch between the two different controls by pressing that button in. Unfortunately, I find this a bit annoying, especially if you can't see the screen to know which one you're currently selected on. And the second knob on the Smallrig light is to control the special effects that are built into the light. On a side note, the Amaran also is capable of similar special effects if you need them, but you have to use the app to access them. And speaking of apps, they both have Bluetooth control via their own customized app. The Amaran uses the Sidus Link app like all Aputure lights, and the Smallrig uses an app called SmallGoGo. I found the connectivity of the Smallrig app to be a bit easier, but the Sidus Link app is much more fully functioned. It has way more options for basic color temperature presets and things that you might want to have handy. All that being said, I really miss when lights had a dedicated remote. With each piece of gear requiring app control these days, my phone is often occupied by something else, and I don't want to have to flip back and forth to adjust. I digress. As far as brightness, they both perform pretty similar. The Smallrig may be using that extra 20 watts to be a hair brighter at 6500K. They're nearly identical at 5600K, and the Amaran seems a bit brighter at 2700K. That being said, I'm severely splitting hairs here, and in practical terms, they're nearly identical. Both lights claim extremely high color quality, and I haven't had any issues with them individually, but I do notice a slight color difference between the two. The Smallrig is ever so slightly shifted over to the green side, whereas the Amaran is shifted a bit more magenta. One of the things that I always look for when I'm considering lights for my studio setup is fan noise. Because I'm in a small space and I want to get the light reasonably close to me, I need a nice quiet fan. I had some fan noise issues with the Amaran 200D, the daylight version of this light, and I kind of expected to run into the same issues here, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that this fan is much quieter. The Amaran lineup also added a function in a firmware update to be able to change between two different fan modes. There's a smart mode where it will adjust the speed of the fan accordingly to how much it needs, and then there's a medium mode which puts the fan on a medium setting always. I love that they added the medium because having consistent background noise is much easier to get out in post, and also just easier to ignore if you can even hear it. The Smallrig, on the other hand, is much louder, and there is no way to control the fan noise that I'm aware of. It's constantly turning the fan on and off when it needs it or when it doesn't, and again, it's quite loud in my quiet little room. So, after all that, which of these two lights should you buy? Well, if having a decent carrying case is important to you, then the Smallrig is the way to go. I did try to see if I could find a similar case that you could buy for the Amaran since it's $20 cheaper, and I came up empty-handed basically. For me, the case isn't a huge deal. I can find ways to transport it if I need to, but for the most part, it stays set up in the studio. For me, the experience of using the controls on the Amaran is definitely better, and that's a big one for me. It turns on quicker and the controls just make more sense. I also think that things just feel better on the Amaran when you're adjusting it. While they both are plastic, the Amaran feels a bit smoother and a bit less cheap than the Smallrig. Another big factor for me, pun intended, is the size. I have a tiny little room here, and having the Amaran be that little bit smaller actually does make a difference in how I can place it and adjust it. And finally, one of the biggest ones for me, like I mentioned before, is that fan noise. Having the Amaran be so quiet and consistent is way easier to deal with in post, and I mean, you can barely notice it in the first place. So for me and my needs, the Amaran is the clear winner, but your needs may vary from mine. Either way, they're both great tools for the price that you pay for them. It's really great to see high quality lights coming down in price. It's definitely more accessible than it was even just a couple of years ago. Links for both the lights are down in the description if you want more information or if you want to pick one up. And as always, I want to hear from you. Which light would you choose and why? Leave a comment down below and let me know. And on your way down there, hit that like and subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you don't miss out on future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.